Hello everybody, it's Jay Roby. Going to be going over a match that a subscriber sent in to me today, and his name is Big Stupid Fingers, so for short I'm just going to call him Big from now on. But it was a very interesting match, and as soon as I saw the email it piqued my interest because he had mentioned that he had watched both the Ready video opening and the Pawn Breakthrough video that I have, and he used the Pawn Breakthrough technique to secure the win. And it's obvious at the end of the game that the black player, although rated higher than Big, I think the black player was rated 1417 and Big is rated 1380 in this match, but it's obvious that the black player was not aware of the Pawn Breakthrough strategy. And it was a very interesting match, and very even all throughout, right up until the end. There were two major blunders, one from each player, and but fortunately for both, neither blunder was caught, so the game was able to go on right up until the end, until the Pawn Breakthrough technique. So we'll get started here. So Big plays the Ready opening knight to f3, and we're going to stay in the main line Ready here for a while. So black plays pawn to d5, and now white plays pawn to c4. Now you might be thinking that this is offering up some kind of a gambit pawn, but this pawn is actually poisoned, and the black player goes ahead and takes, but white can now just come in and deliver a check. And the best move for black in this position is to play the bishop out, which black does, and now white simply can just come in and recapture that pawn. Now, one of the benefits for white in this position is simply a slight advantage in activity. We have a queen, we have a knight, and a good grasp of the center early on. If you're playing chess, you always want to be looking out for small advantages, and then over time those small advantages will build up into a winning position. So from here now, black plays pawn now to e6, and this is preventing the queen from ever influencing the weak square on f7. And that's important because white immediately has the capability to jump the knight to e5 and g5, which both really take advantage of the weak square here on f7. And we're still in the main line Ready, so white plays pawn to d4, and then from this position black develops knight to f6, and white now comes in with a nice pin on the knight with bishop to g5. And this basically stops the knight from coming into e4 and causing a problem. And in the match, this was actually the last book line move in the Ready, and the match is going to deviate now a little bit from book. So black plays pawn to a6, basically preparing an attack on the queen, and white plays pawn to e4. Black develops bishop to e7. Now this is to stop the pin on this knight, but white has simply a nice option here to take the knight. Black recaptures, and now white plays e5, and this gains space for white. So it's a nice small advantage again. In terms of material and position, it's still a very equal game at this point. There is no decisive advantage for either player, but that move allows white to gain more space. So the bishop is forced back to e7, so that bishop has been moved 2 times now in the opening. And although, like I said before, it's still an equal position, white is continuing to build up small advantages as we go. So from here, white plays bishop to d3. Now, I guess this does give the bishop access along the diagonal here and supports the queen, but I think in this position here, I prefer knight to c3. And for a couple reasons. First, it stops the bishop from coming down immediately to attack the queen, because if black were to do that, it would simply lose a pawn, because the bishop comes, knight takes, pawn captures, and then queen captures with check. So the most obvious line probably after knight to c3 would be b5, attacking the queen, and then the queen can fall back to b3, and then bishop to c6 is what my engine is saying would be pretty good for both players, in fairly equal position. But nonetheless, bishop to d3 doesn't cause any huge problems for white, so the game is still equal in this position. So from here, black now attacks the queen with bishop to b5, queen falls back to c2, black bishop captures, and white recaptures. And here we're going to start to see a little bit of gameplay around d4. So black plays pawn to c5. Now this pawn cannot be captured because the queen would be left hanging. So white castles. Black now develops knight to c6, adding even more firepower here to d4. And white responds by adding a rook to d1, strengthening the square farther. And at this point in the match, we have a lot of material trades take place. Pawn captures, knight, knight captures, queen. Here goes the queens off the board. And then from this position, black castles. White continues on with development with knight to c3, and black plays rook to c8. And in this position, white makes a game-crushing blunder, but fortunately for white, black didn't catch it. And the blunder is pawn to f4. I'm not sure if you can see the blunder right away, but if you can't, pause the video and take a couple seconds to see if you can figure it out. But basically, pawn to f4 opens up a devastating pin for black. Bishop to c5 basically pins that rook right down to the king, and there's nothing that white's going to be able to do that'll stop the bishop from capturing that rook. But fortunately for white, black didn't see that and instead played rook to d8. And from this position, I think Big might have realized the possible pin that was in the position here and happily traded that rook off. Black recaptures, and white comes in now with a very nice move, rook to d1. And black basically is threatened with a back rank mate if this bishop were to move. But black has a way out, simply comes down, lands a check, giving it a free move to take that rook out. White recaptures, and now black gets its king ready to come into the center to skirt around f6 and d6. White plays pawn up to g4. Black continues to work the king into the center of the board, and white plays h4. And from here, black plays bishop to d4, attacking the pawn on b2, but you'll notice that the knight is protecting that pawn anyway, so white takes the opportunity to march its king into the center of the board. And black continues along the same line, plays king to d7, and now white plays king to d3, attacking the bishop, and I think here black might have made a positional mistake. It's not really crushing at the moment, but black plays bishop to g1. I don't think I would have played the bishop to g1 in this position, because this allows now white to play knight to e3, sort of locking that bishop in place. Now the bishop could go to h2 and attack the weak pawn here on f4, but I think that would be met pretty quickly by king to e4. So I'm not too sure what the black player was thinking here. So from here, after the bishop is blocked in, black moves king to c6, and now white plays pawn to f5. From here, black takes, white recaptures, and now black tries to get the king into the action, but it's too late because the king now moves to f4, and now we're getting very close to the pawn breakthrough technique here. So after king to f4, black plays now king to d4. Possibly, maybe he's thinking of going down to attack the pawns on a2 and b2. But white continues pressing the pawns up with pawn to g5. And I think black sensed some danger here with that and tried to get the king back into the action by moving king to d5, and white plays pawn to h5. And I'm not sure if Big was aware of this at the time, but black actually could have got a win out of this position. But in the match, black wasn't aware of it, obviously, and played pawn to b6. So that tells me that at the time, black felt comfortable with its pawn position. But what this let white do is use the pawn technique against black. So let's go back and see why h5 was a bad move for white. So after h5, black can simply play g6, and after this, white does not have any good counters to this, because most likely what's going to happen is white will capture, black will recapture, white will capture, and then black will capture. But most importantly, you'll notice that the king is now married to these two pawns for their protection and cannot move off of f4, otherwise the e5 pawn will fall. So the only move that white really has is a pawn move in this position, such as a3. But after that, the black king can simply peel off now and do its damage, because its own pawns are protecting the white king from accessing those squares, and the white king's own pawns are stopping it from accessing those squares. So the black king is going to be able to come down and rip apart the pawns and get a promotion without much problem at all. However, in the game, it's after Big played h5, the black player must not have been familiar with the strategy, because black played pawn to b6, which allowed white now to play the breakthrough strategy, which is simply moving the center pawn up of the three pawns when they're opposing the enemy pawns. Because once black captures, if white pushes the pawn up that is opposite of the capture, which Big did, there's no way black can stop one one of these two pawns from being a passed pawn. For example, if black captures here, white simply pushes this pawn forward. And alternatively, if black captures here, white simply captures here and then promotes on the next turn. So there's nothing that black can do, and actually Big used that to secure the win. And although black was able to get some pawn checks, once the queen came onto the board, it was all over. So it was a good match, and I'm glad that Big sent it in, and I really enjoyed making the video and going over the lines and the possibilities. And I think even though that there were blunders on both sides, I think it really shows that if you know a technique that your opponent doesn't, you can really use it to your advantage. And I think Big really capitalized in the end game here, even though he made some mistakes. I think his opponent's lack of understanding just caused Black to completely lose the game at a crucial time. So take care, hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.